So guys, in our previous session, we have already seen how to create a Docker image, how to run it as a container, and finally, we also saw that how to deploy that in the Docker Hub repository so that you can also pull it and run it in your local machine, right? Now, in this video, we are going to discuss about a very important topic, which is called as Docker Compose. Now, let's understand why do we use Docker Compose. But before that, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say that I have my web application, which is specifically running in a container. So all the default configuration that is required with respect to the port and the requirements that is needs to be installed before we run it as a container, everything is put up over here in a specific Docker file. Okay, so here obviously you will be having a Docker file right over here, right? Now let's consider that if this particular web application wants to use services like MySQL, Redis, or MongoDB. Now you know that if you go to the Docker Hub, right, you will be finding different images for MySQL, for Redis, for MongoDB. So it will not be possible just to run MySQL inside this container. So this needs to be run as a separate container. This needs to be running as a separate container, and similarly, this needs to be run. MongoDB also needs to be run as a separate container. And then this web application can basically interact with MySQL, Redis, or MongoDB and basically store or retrieve the data. Redis is specifically used for the caching purpose, which will basically increase your performance of the website. Now, why exactly is Docker Compose used? Now see guys, Docker Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container Docker applications. Now in this particular scenario here, you can see that you have multiple containers, right? You have one MySQL container, Redis container, and MongoDB container. So Docker Compose, with the help of Docker Compose, we will define the entire configuration. So we will basically create a file which is called as docker-compose.yml file. Okay, and then we can jot down all the configuration requirements that is basically used to run all this multi containers, and they will also be able to communicate with each other. Okay, so this in short is about Docker Compose, and let's go ahead and see a practical example, and then you will get an idea. Let's say that this is my app.py, and this app.py has a code. Again, this code is not that important, but you need to understand how do we use Docker Compose. So here you'll be seeing that I'm using a Redis, and this is a Python application that I've written. So Redis usually helps us in caching information, and it will be caching within the memory itself, in memory caching. So here what we'll be doing is that we'll be running this entire code, and we are making sure that the cache is implemented over here by using this specific code. Okay, so this will be my define hello, and whenever I hit this, it will say hello Krish, I've seen this many number of times. So this count will basically be saved with the Redis. Okay, now the first thing is that whenever you want to create a Docker Compose file, now here one thing is that Redis you are using. This Redis is present as an image in the Docker Hub, which I will again show you, and then you'll be able to understand it. Okay, now first of all, I will go ahead and create a Docker file. Now this Docker file will be for this particular application container. Okay, so here I will go ahead and write my Docker file. In my Docker file, you can, again, the steps will be almost same. Whatever things we have actually used, we have to use those specific commands. Okay, but today in this video, I also want to convert something about environment variables. So one command is that from, let's say I'm going to use Python 3.7, and this will be in Alpine mode, Alpine version. Basically, the Linux base is this. Why we use this? Because it will be very small in size and can be quickly created as a base and run it as a container itself. Then finally, I will go ahead and write my work directory. Let's say this is my work directory, and obviously the work directory that I really want to keep is, you can write anything, any folder, like you want app or you want code, any folder that you want. So this will basically be my working directory. Then I will copy my uh, from the current location, that is this first parameter that you basically indicate is that from the current location, whatever file are there, I'm just going to push it inside this code folder, right? So code folder, since I've set it to my working directory over here, so I'll be inside that particular code location, right? So code folder location. So here you can basically see that I have written dot. Okay, so next step is basically just copying that specific file to over here. Now before this also, I really want to specify some environment files, right? See, in Flask, because this app.py is a Flask file, right? We can run it through various ways. We can directly use a command which is called as Flask run. But in that, we need to set up some environment variables. So let me just show with respect to environment variables. In case of environment variables, we have to write env, and we can supply it in the form of key value pairs. In case of Flask, I have to supply flask underscore app is equal to app.py file, which is my file. And the other one is that app.py, and oops. And after I press enter, another environment that I usually put up is flask underscore, not environment. Environment is not required, but I will write run underscore host. So I can also specify my host information when I am actually running the Flask app. So this will be 0.0.0. Okay. So this can either be local machine or your local IP address, anything it can be. So this I have set up the environment, and as soon as I write Flask run, automatically it will be taking up this app.py file and on which environment it has to, or in which host it has to basically run, or which IP it has to run. It has all this information. So now this copy command, I hope everybody has understood. From a local repository, we are just trying to copying it to this code folder itself, which is present inside the Docker image. And then I'm going to run the pip install -r requirement.txt because this is super important. So here one environment variable I've spoken about, which I had not covered in my previous video. And one more variable that I really want to talk about is something called as expose. So here through this particular expose, I can specify the port number that will be exposed from the container. So let's say if I'm writing 5000, that basically means inside the container, this 5000 port will be exposed to the host environment. Okay. And finally, I will write my command, which will be cmd. This command is basically to run all the, just a second, so 5000. And finally I'll be having a command which will basically say two things. One is flask comma run, right? So this is it. So now here you'll be able to see that I'm going to just execute this at the end of the day, flask run. So as soon as this command runs this, right? First of all, in the environment variable, it will look for app.py, and then it will look for host, and it will just get all the information and it'll start running it. Okay. So I'm saving this. This is what is my Docker file that I'm actually going to create. Now coming to the next one is basically the Docker compose file, because I need to use Redis in my application. And this is one example with respect to Redis. Probably you also want to use MySQL and all. I'll show you a way how you can basically use the Docker Hub for the same purpose. Okay. So first of all, I'll create a file which is called as docker-compose.yml file. Now, once I have created this docker-compose.yml file, understand why it is basically used, so that we can run multiple containers and it will also be able to interact with each other. So this is the tool that is used for defining all those things. So first of all, the field that we are going to use is something like version. So let's say I'm going to just specify a specific version like 3.0. Okay. And again, this needs to be followed a key value pairs in that specific way, right? The key value pairs with some space. Okay. Version. The first thing is that I will just write services. This is the syntax that we specifically use. Now, with respect to services, I'm going to use web. Okay. Um, and inside the web, let's say this web, as soon as we write web, this is basically going to create a web service, and this web service is going to use the Docker file of the specific application. So here in the web, the first command that I will probably write is something called as build. So here you can see uh, build right now from where you're going to do the Docker build itself, right? So Docker image build. So here you can see that in the Docker file, we have kept the working directory as /code. So inside /code, all this entire file will be present. So I'm just going to write build as dot, so that the build will happen from the same root folder. Okay. And then I'm going to assign the ports. In this ports, understand what all the ports are there, and please make sure that you keep this indentation, right? This indentation is super important. If you do not follow this indentation, then you may be getting a syntax error when you're getting a building. When you're doing the build, that time you'll be getting a syntax error, right? So in this particular case, let's say I'm just going to keep it as 5000, and this will also be 5000. So this is nothing by host port to the container port. That is what I'm using. I can also use 8000 if I want. All this information is there, right? So web build ports. So we are going to also even assign the ports. Now coming to the next one. Now this entire services is definitely for my Docker file, current Docker file of my application. Now I can go ahead and write other web services like Redis. Okay. So now if I basically write Redis and probably write my image name, right? So let's say I'm going to specify my image name. The image name is nothing but Redis, right? Now this Redis, as soon as we write like this, right, it is also going to create another service or container of specific Redis. And this image, when I'm writing this, right, it is going to pull this particular image from the from the Docker Hub repository. So here you can see this will be my one service. So one image of web will get created, the another image of Redis will get created. Similarly, I can go ahead and probably create my own image for MySQL also. Okay, so I can also go ahead and create the image for MySQL. So in this, if I specifically writing MySQL and I'm writing like this, I can then give my MySQL image name like this, and let's say this is my SQL that I'm going to use. So this will be another image that will get created within my SQL. This image will get created for Redis, and this will be image for the web, which will basically using this particular Docker file, it will try to run all these things, right? So this is how we combine multiple services. For now, I will just show you an example with respect to web and Redis, and let's see how the output will basically come. So here are two things. I've already explained you about it. You can also specify the image name if you want. Okay. So like this, if you want to specify the image name, then also you can actually specify. If I'm probably writing image is equal to Redis, sorry, this is my, let's say this is my web app. Okay. So this is my image name for this particular web service, and for Redis, my image name is this. Obviously, if the web app will be built here itself from the local, right? So it is going to use the Docker file. So let's go ahead and execute it now. Okay, guys, now let's go ahead and open the terminal and let's see how to run this Docker Compose, which will automatically be doing the build and running part. So first of all, I will just go and check my Docker images and see whether any image is present or not. So right now, no images. Here you can see it is completely empty. So let me clean my screen. Now I will be using Docker Compose, and let's say I'm writing Docker Compose up. Okay, so let's say if I'm saying up, then automatically what will happen, this entire YML file will get executed. Anyhow, see, I was running in PowerShell, so I'm getting this coloring option. Let me do one thing. Let me just open something like my command prompt and let me quickly show you. Okay, first of all, Docker images. So here you can see, and then I'm basically going to write Docker Compose, and in order to run it, I'll just write up. So as soon as I do this, all the steps will be going line by line. So here you can see version, this image, everything step by step. Here you can see Redis has been pulled already at its build copies, instruction is happening, run pip install requirement is basically happening. Everything is happening perfectly fine. And here now you can see the link, right? So right now the link that you can see by default, whenever Flask runs, it will be running at 5000 port. But you know that we have exposed it in 9000 port. So I am getting some error. Let's see what is the error. Redis attribute has no attribute reset retry. Okay, perfect. That basically means I have done some error over here. Let me just remove this line because I don't require this line. Okay. I was just checking it somehow. Okay, not a problem. So in order to stop it, since I got some error, I'm just going to open another command prompt and write docker compose stop. Okay. Now, once I write docker compose stop, here you'll be able to see Docker will be stopped. I'll also be showing you all the images that will be there. Okay. So there was some mistake in the code. So what I'll do is here, I'll again rebuild it and again I'll send it. Okay. So now here, if you go back to the command prompt, again it has come out. Okay. Right now, if I go and see Docker images, right, two images will definitely get created. One is web app and one is Redis, right? But we got an error. So here you can see web app is there and Redis is there. This was the image name that I gave, right? So let me do one thing. Since I need to rebuild it again, first of all, I really need to remove these images. So remove my, so again, I'm going to use the same thing, and volume part we'll see it in the next video. Okay. And now I'll just going to execute it over here. So done. This is perfectly done. I'm just going to clear the screen. Now, if I probably go and see Docker images, nothing is there. I've saved my file in app.py. I made all the issues that fixed. It is already fixed. Now I'm going to write docker compose up. So once I execute it, the entire step will happen again. And now let's see whether it will work or not. Okay, already exist. Now you can see whichever things are already existing, right? It'll not going to download it again because somewhere in our local it'll be there, right? Now perfectly fine, it is working. You can see build also continuously happened, and after that it is also running. Now if I probably execute this and come over here, you will be able to see one browser which has something like this, but you know that we have exposed it to 8000. Now I'll execute it. Hello Krish, I have seen 74 times because I had already implemented this and previously ran, and so many number of times I tested it. Okay, now here you can see that it's working absolutely fine. As you go, if you're running it for the first time, you'll be getting it one, and that is why if you keep on increasing, if you keep on just reloading it, this count will get increased. This is happening through the Redis cache. Okay, just to show you how it is. So if you keep on doing it continuously, it will happen. Now let me show you one important issue. Okay, now let's say that I want to just change this message. Hello Krish, I just want to write hello dockers. Okay, and let me save it. Now in this particular scenario, obviously I know that if I try to run it, right, it is not going to get updated again over here. So for this I have to reload this entire thing again. I have to stop the container, and again I have to rebuild all my images, and again I have to reload it, then only hello dockers will come, right? So this is a tedious process, right? And this thing can be fixed with the help of docker volumes. Okay, so that is what we are going to learn in the next video. But I hope you understood that how we are running with respect to different images and as a container by using Docker Compose. Now, one more thing that I really want to show you, which you can basically try, and probably I'll also make a video as we go ahead. If I search for MySQL, right, just think over it before my further videos will come, how you can integrate MySQL with your image, right, with your web application or web container, right? Now in this particular case here, you can see that whenever you are using a MySQL, you have to use default environments like this and provide your values, right? First of all, you'll pull this MySQL, and here just see the documentation. Here all the documentation will actually help you to understand, and the same command can basically be used in the docker compose also, right? Docker compose also. So I hope you have got an idea about how you can basically run it. Now the next step, you can see over here, I'll write docker images. So here you'll be able to see docker images, web app, and Redis. But if you go and see docker ps, here you'll be able to see two containers are running, web app and Redis, and both are communicating with each other. One is exposed from 8000 to 50, and this is 6379/TCP, right? So by default, whatever it is basically giving. And where do we get this? This is from the Docker Hub itself. It'll assign a port from there itself by default. Okay. So this port is getting assigned by default, right? So now if I really want to stop it, all I have to write is docker compose stop. That's it. So once I execute this, all this this entire thing will get stopped, but you'll still have the images over there. So yes, I will see you all in the next video. Thank you.